Hey everyone, welcome to Off Topic Tuesdays. Going to be taking a look at another old world faction that definitely needs some loving, and it's the one I think most of us are expecting CA to handle next. This, of course, being the Greenskins. So grab a drink, kick back, and let's get into it.
Wow.
So before we get into what the Greenskins need, let's get into what the Greenskins are likely to get no matter what when the next DLC drops for them. I think almost everyone is expecting to see the Grom and the Grim for the next DLC now, these referring to Grom the Paunch for the Greenskins and Altherion the Grim for the Elves. Prior to the last DLC with Reponse, I would have said that there was some trepidation and maybe some justifications for why they wouldn't do it, notably being that Grom the Paunch is dead in the lore. But seeing as how they've kind of played around with things since that last DLC, I'm pretty much on board with that being what we're going to see for the next DLC for the Greenskins. Now, whether or not we see a second Legendary Lord for the Greenskins is a bit more of a debate to be had, but I think Grom the Paunch is pretty safe bet for quite a few reasons, actually. One of these reasons being the gameplay that Grom covers. So in the normal Greenskin lineup, we already have an Orc melee Legendary Lord. We already have an Orc Caster Lord. We already have a Goblin Caster Lord. Grom would represent a Goblin melee Lord, which is not something we've particularly seen yet, and also opens up quite a few other options. For one thing, he would be your definition of a tank. So whereas the Orc melee Lords are more of kill the enemy before they kill you kind of deal, Grom would have just excessive regeneration. He'd kind of be Vlad the Impaler in that, or Vlad von Karstein in that sense. You would just sit him in almost like a tar pit unto himself and just endure everything the enemy threw at you. Something else that Grom does that we haven't really seen with any of the other greenskin options is they would also be a naval focused one, right? Um, there's not a lot of surprising. There's not a lot of orc pirates in the setting, unlike 40k. Grom the Paunch, on the other hand, after he had kind of bent the Empire over the barrel and shown them what for, decided to build up a fleet to go around and sail the rest of the world. That's actually how he ended up in conflict with Altherion the Grim, is because he actually sailed over to Ifrest to continue fighting. On top of that, because of how he sacked the Empire and because of how he had fought the Elves, he would also have a lot of play with the existing factions in the setting, a justification for being at war and having mission focuses as he would. He also has specific items and spells and stuff like that. So, I mean, he's pretty much a slam dunk for CA to throw in. They don't even have to do any creativity. They can literally just drag and drop him and basically put him into the setting. So he's got that going for him too. Now, if Grom the Paunch is, of course, the Greenskin Legendary Lord option, and there is the potential of a secondary Legendary Lord option for the Greenskins, the question becomes, who does that second option become? The Greenskins have just a ludicrous amount of options left for named characters. Um, Myself, I have some particular preferences, and I'll get into them in just a sec, but this is one of the ones where CA is not going to have to struggle. I mean, they are swimming in options. The bigger difficulty is going to be to try and find one that actually adds something interesting to the game. So assuming that we do pick Grom the Paunch, what else can we expect as the content around them? So while the Greenskins are still missing quite a lot of their military options, especially when it comes to the bestial side of things like trolls, wyverns, and squigs, those don't feel particularly thematic to Grom the Paunch to me, with the sole possible exception of trolls, I guess, depending on how they want to do that story. And then the same thing goes for the orcs too, right? They're not really what Grom the Paunch is about. He's more of a goblin character. He is a goblin character. So then, I guess to me, the focus becomes goblin characters that are still remaining, and if we are going to possibly do the second Legendary Lord option, or frankly even without it, I would also like to see some more forest goblin representation. So the first option, and the option I think would be by far the most fun and entertaining one on this list, would be the Snotling Pump Wagon. This is essentially a steam tank if a steam tank was made by utter idiots. It's it's a self-propelled fighting machine. It's greenskin technology, if it can even vaguely be called that. But it lets these small, irrelevant little snotlings actually field what would be a fairly high-tech, or not high-tech, but high-tech level unit, right? Ordinarily, your goblins are kind of petered out by tiers 2, maybe even 3, but this will be something that would probably be closer to tier 4 or even 5. On top of that, too, it also has a few variant options available, which CA could use to kind of get more bang for the buck in terms of the development cycle for this thing, and then again, it would be something that's completely unique in the Greenskin arsenal. Another option would be the Goblin Fire Kobolds. They're essentially goblins, but with a ranged fire attack. Doesn't sound particularly interesting, though it would still give a few more options to the Greenskin arsenal, especially from the Goblin side of things, which again I think should be a focal point of Grom's additional units. Wouldn't be particularly hard for CA to put in there either, considering that their animations and whatnot would probably be very similar to the existing Goblin units, just with a different skin over top of them. One very easy addition would be Hill Goblins, who are essentially bigger, stronger goblins. You basically just slot them in as an orc replacement up at the higher tiers. Um, just something to kind of help differentiate goblin-focused armies from orc-focused armies, which I think would also be kind of fun to retroactively move over to Skarsnik too. Try to get more of a distinction between the two as opposed to goblins just being worse orcs all around. Continuing on my theme of goblins would be the Troglodytes. They are essentially swampy-ish goblins. They don't sound particularly interesting, however, given that you could do custom rules for them and stuff, you could definitely give them a niche use on the battlefield. On top of that too, it would also open up Captain Scabend as a potential character who would effectively be a goblin pirate lord. Again, they kind of punch above their weight. The other option would be the Boglars. They're also a swampy-ish one. Again, like the Troglogobs, they have a unique aesthetic. They would both probably be stealth-based would be my guess, and that would give them kind of strike from nowhere, try to kill the enemy before they can react sort of gameplay methodology. But again, there's a few options on the table for CA to work with here. So going away from what the Greenskins already have and what do they need, I think the first one and the one that needs to be addressed pronto is the wall mechanic. I'm seeing a lot of discontent in the forums, and frankly I agree with a lot of it regarding the mechanic. It's very limiting in terms of how you can play the game. If you've got an army that can't logically win a fight against an opponent, you're kind of faced with a no-win situation. If you try to attack, you'll lose, and on the flip side, if you don't attack, you'll suffer attrition and still lose. I would tweak it dramatically so that instead of this being attrition and bonus army, you would essentially have increased upkeep or increased recruiting costs and whatnot down towards the lower ends. And as you moved up the scales, you could get cheaper recruitment costs, higher tier or higher veterancy levels through your recruitments, and better stats when you're actually in battle at the very, very high end of the tiers. And I would also lower down the changes per turn. The wall mechanic can shift dramatically turn over turn to the point where it can be extremely frustrating as a player to try and plan around it. Taming that back down would go a long ways. As it stands, I don't know how many others do this. I turn off the wall mechanic through a mod when I play my games because I find it utterly frustrating to deal with. Something else the Greenskins really need to get going for them is just something to do with infrastructure, I find. They tend to be a very expansionist faction, but more expansionist in the sense that they're constantly going back and trying to recover the stuff that they've already lost. It's not a particularly fun campaign style, and it's not one I'm particularly stoked to go back and play. They need to give the Greenskins more of a cover the earth's kind of playstyle. It's a lot more lore appropriate for them, and it should be almost impossible to uproot them once they've really taken over an area. How they want to go about doing that, that's CA's call, whether they have some form of, I don't know, increased garrisons or some other methodology for justifying it. Like I said, I'll leave that to CA to figure out, but at the moment, the Greenskins to me kind of feels like being forced to go out and fight everywhere, and then coming back and being forced to recover the stuff that you just turned around and lost. And while a smaller one, a third thing that needs to be fixed is their tech tree. It's very annoying to have to wait so late in the game compared to everyone else to even get started in the tech tree. It's, I get that it's maybe thematically appropriate, but even if there's just a token couple of techs down low or something, that would go quite a ways already towards helping them out. Um, there's a lot of stuff I think that really need to be fixed on the orcs, depending on how deep they want to go into the fix. One other thing that I could see being very fun is the wall mechanic. Instead of doing it on an army by army basis, take it out and put it as a uh, global resource kind of deal that affects all armies. And then if you did it that way too, you could also do, unique lords and stuff hidden up there, or unique bonuses, unique spells, kind of like the Cult of Sotek's sacrificial offerings, but instead based upon how many fights you've got going on or how many fights you've won recently and stuff like that. That could give them a lot more of a fun way to play, but at the moment they're the one I go for the least often because they're just not a good option to play as. So those are my picks, right? I know the default response is to try and ask for everything under the sun, but if we do that, we're not going to get an update from CA for a decade yet. There's just too much stuff missing from the Greenskins. If you have any other suggestions that you'd like to see, or if you didn't agree with any of my picks, let me know down in the comments below. Just as a heads up, there's not going to be a mod review this week. The upcoming off-topic Tuesdays is chewing up a ton of my time. I will let you know in advance. It's going to be about Chaos Undivided with the upcoming Total Warhammer 3 and how they'd be integrated into that. So stay tuned for that, but I do apologize. As always, though, thanks for watching.